They told Brock Lesnar he was untouchable. They told him no one backstage would ever check him, that the locker room was his territory, that his size, his MMA background, his Paul Heyman-backed ego made him bulletproof behind those curtains. They were dead wrong. Because one man walked up to Brock Lesnar in that backstage corridor and did what an entire roster of terrified superstars refused to do for years. He looked the beast straight in the eyes, and he did not flinch, not even a little. His name? Obafemi. And what happened next didn't just embarrass Brock Lesnar, it ended him. I'm not talking about a promo. I'm not talking about a segment on Raw. I'm talking about a real, unscripted, backstage confrontation that Vince McMahon's team scrambled to bury, a moment so brutal, so damaging to Lesnar's carefully constructed alpha male image, that the people in that hallway refuse to talk about it on record to this day. Brock Lesnar's career, the myth, the legend, the monster, died in that hallway. And by the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly why. Stay right here. Segment 1: The myth of Brock Lesnar's untouchable status. 0:45 to 2:30. Let's rewind and understand what made Brock Lesnar feel like he could do anything backstage without consequences. From the moment Lesnar arrived in WWE, he operated under a completely different set of rules than every other superstar on the roster. He wasn't just a character, he was a business asset, a PPV draw, a needle mover, the kind of performer whose name alone sold out arenas and inflated buy rates. Vince McMahon didn't just push Brock Lesnar. Vince McMahon protected Brock Lesnar. The guy had a part-time contract that paid him more per appearance than most full-time talent earned in a year. He showed up when he wanted. He left when he wanted. He called audibles in matches mid-execution, and the other wrestler had better figure it out or face the consequences. And backstage? Backstage was where the real Brock Lesnar showed up. Multiple accounts from former WWE talent describe a man who commanded silence when he walked into a room. Not because people respected him, because people were afraid of him. Superstars who'd been in the business for decades would move out of the way in the hallway. Agents who outranked everyone on the card still tiptoed around his mood. There are documented stories, some public, some whispered only in podcast green rooms, of Lesnar physically intimidating talent, blowing off producers, and treating the entire enterprise like it existed to serve him. Why did WWE tolerate it? Simple. Money. Brock Lesnar printed money. And when you print money, you get a long leash. But here's the thing about long leashes: eventually, someone cuts them. Segment 2: Who is Obafemi? The man nobody saw coming. 2:30 to 4:45. Now let's talk about the man at the center of this story. Because if you think this is about some random nobody stumbling into a situation, you are completely mistaken. Obafemi was not a man who stumbled anywhere. He walked into rooms deliberately. He carried himself with the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to announce itself, the kind that makes other confident men nervous, because they can't rattle it. Those who worked alongside him in the wrestling business describe him as someone who simply did not operate within the social hierarchy that Lesnar relied on, where most of the locker room had been slowly conditioned through years of working for the same company, under the same management, watching the same names get protected, to accept that certain people were untouchable. Obafemi had no such conditioning. He came from a different world. A world where respect wasn't handed out based on pay grade or Vince McMahon's favorites list. A world where if you had a problem with a man, you handled it like a man, face to face, no politics, no PR management, no carefully worded statement from a PR rep 2 days later. And that is what made him the single most dangerous person in that building on the night this confrontation happened. Not his physical ability, though, make no mistake, that was nothing to dismiss, but his mindset. His complete and total refusal to treat Brock Lesnar like Brock Lesnar had spent years training the entire roster to treat him. Obafemi didn't see a monster. He saw a man who had been let off the hook too many times, and he was about to change that. Segment 3: The night everything broke loose. What actually happened. 4:45 to 8 o'clock. Now I want to be precise here, because there's a lot of noise around this story and I need you to understand what actually went down, not the watered-down version, not the sanitized corporate retelling, but the real sequence of events as pieced together from multiple credible accounts. The evening in question started like dozens of others in a WWE production cycle. A packed backstage area, crew members moving equipment, producers running finalized segments, catering set up along one corridor, the organized chaos of a major WWE event ticking toward showtime. Brock Lesnar was backstage in his usual mode, operating in his own bubble, separate from the pack, with Paul Heyman running interference as always. Lesnar had reportedly had a rough interaction earlier in the evening with a producer over creative direction. He was in a foul mood. And when Brock Lesnar was in a foul mood, people cleared the way. But Obafemi was in that corridor, and he didn't clear the way. What happened next, according to those present, unfolded in less than 3 minutes, but those 3 minutes dismantled 10 years of Brock Lesnar's backstage mythology in real time. Lesnar, operating on his usual assumption that the hallway would reorganize itself around his presence, made a comment. A dismissive, contemptuous comment in the direction of Obafemi, the kind of comment Lesnar had made 100 times before to 100 different people who swallowed it and walked away. Obafemi didn't swallow it. He stopped. He turned. And he responded. Not with aggression. Not with threats. With something far more devastating to a man like Brock Lesnar, with calmness. With clarity. With the specific, surgical kind of words that cut through a man's armor and reach whatever's underneath. He told Lesnar directly, without raising his voice, in front of witnesses, exactly what everyone in that locker room had been thinking for years but never dared to say out loud. He stripped away the persona. He stripped away the Paul Heyman mythology. He addressed Brock Lesnar not as a monster or a legend or an asset, but as an insecure man who had mistaken fear for respect his entire career. And Brock Lesnar, the man who made Roman Reigns look small, the man who conquered The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak, the man who had literally mauled opponents in sanctioned MMA competition, stood there and had no answer. That silence? That silence was heard throughout that backstage corridor like a thunderclap, because everyone there understood what it meant. The moment Lesnar failed to respond, the moment he broke eye contact and the energy shifted, it was over. The spell was broken. The Emperor had no clothes. Several witnesses described Lesnar walking away, not storming off, not aggressive, just walking away, quietly, which somehow made it more humiliating, not less. The locker room never forgot it. Segment 4: The ripple effect, how this moment poisoned Lesnar's standing. 8 to 10:30. Here's where it gets deeper. Because this wasn't just a bad night for Brock Lesnar. This was a structural collapse. Backstage dynamics in professional wrestling run entirely on perception, not reality perception. The reason Lesnar had been able to operate the way he did for so long wasn't because he could legitimately defeat everyone in that building in a real fight, though the argument could be made. It was because everyone believed he could. And more importantly, everyone believed no one would ever challenge him on it. The moment Obafemi removed that belief, the entire ecosystem shifted. Within days of the incident, the whispers started. And in a locker room full of people who had spent years suppressing their frustrations with Lesnar's behavior, whispers travel fast. People who had never spoken openly about their negative experiences with Lesnar suddenly found themselves in conversations they'd never had before. The dam had cracked. Management noticed. You cannot have a principal performer's authority, even the informal, social authority that Lesnar wielded, suddenly evaporate without it affecting the wider dynamics of a roster. And it did affect them. Noticeably. Paul Heyman, ever the master of controlled narrative, attempted damage control. But you cannot spin a silence. You cannot package a moment where Brock Lesnar stood in a corridor and simply had nothing to say. The people who were there saw it. And they talked. Lesnar's subsequent appearances backstage were described by multiple sources as notably different in energy. The room no longer reorganized itself around him. People didn't exactly get comfortable. Nobody was testing Brock Lesnar physically, but the psychological grip he'd held for years had loosened, visibly and permanently. For a man whose identity was so completely fused with dominance and fear, that loosening wasn't just a professional inconvenience. It was an existential wound. Segment 5: Why WWE couldn't protect him this time. 10:30 to 12:30. Now, WWE has protected Brock Lesnar from a lot over the years. That's not a controversial statement. It's simply what happens when a company's financial interests are tied to a performer's image. But there are limits to what even Vince McMahon's machine can bury. They could control the camera. They could control the narrative on television. They could engineer Lesnar's on-screen character to be invincible regardless of what was happening off-screen. What they couldn't control was the locker room's memory. What they couldn't control was the fact that somewhere between 30 and 50 people witnessed or heard about this confrontation in real time. What they couldn't control was the fact that wrestlers talk on podcasts, in interviews, in private conversations that eventually become public ones. The information didn't explode overnight. It seeped. Slowly. Persistently. The way real information always does when powerful people want it suppressed. And eventually, it reached the fans. Because it always does. The fans began to notice things. Not because anyone sat them down and told them what happened backstage, but because Brock Lesnar's on-screen product began to reflect, in subtle ways, the diminishing weight of his real-world backstage presence. The confidence wasn't quite the same. The edge wasn't quite as sharp. When you know what to look for, you can see it. The beast was still booked as a monster. But he stopped feeling like one. Segment 6: What this means for pro wrestling's locker room culture. 12:30 to 14:30. I want to take a moment here because this story isn't just about Brock Lesnar and Obafemi. This story is about something bigger. Pro wrestling has a locker room culture that has, for decades, enabled a very specific type of behavior. The veteran who rules through intimidation. The superstar whose perceived legitimacy, real or fabricated, allows them to bypass the normal social contract of a shared workplace. We've seen it throughout wrestling history. Andre the Giant had it. Stan Hansen had it. More recently, Lesnar had it. And for years, the response from younger, newer talent was silence. Because speaking up meant career consequences. Because the machine protects its investments. Because the unspoken rule was, if you want to survive in this business, you learn who the untouchables are, and you stay out of their way. Obafemi refusing to stay out of the way wasn't just a personal act of courage. It was a statement about what a locker room can be, what it should be, a place where everyone operates under the same rules regardless of their paycheck or their spot on the card. That's the part of this story that genuinely matters. That's the part that will be talked about long after the specific details of that corridor have faded. One man standing firm changed the entire energy of a locker room that had been operating under a culture of fear for years. That is why this story refuses to die. Closing the legacy of that hallway 1430 to 1530. Brock Lesnar's career will be debated for decades. The streak. The MMA crossover. The part-time contract that broke professional wrestling's pay structure. He is, objectively, one of the most impactful performers in the history of the business. But there is now a before and after to his story. And the dividing line is a corridor. And a man who refused to move. Obafemi didn't need a championship. He didn't need a WrestleMania moment. He didn't need a pyro entrance or a Paul Heyman promo. He needed 30 seconds and the refusal to flinch, and with that, he did what an entire roster couldn't. He made Brock Lesnar human. And in pro wrestling, once a monster becomes human, they never fully go back. Drop a comment below. Do you think Brock Lesnar's backstage reputation deserved to be torn down? And who else in the current locker room is operating on borrowed fear? Because this conversation is far from over. If you're not subscribed to Ring Rumble 1, you are already missing the conversations the mainstream wrestling media is too scared to have. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video because some of your wrestling friends need to see this. I'll see you in the next one.